So let's discuss what Tzom Gedaliah is about. First, the history, and then we'll understand why it is the Jewish practice became very early on, before the building of the Second Temple, that it is one of the 4 fast days that commemorates the destruction of the First Temple. So let's talk about Shaphan. Shaphan, who has a very interesting name, was a prominent person in Jerusalem. 2 of his sons are mentioned in Sefer Yirmiyahu. The first is Gemaryahu. It says Gemaryahu ben Shaphan Sofer was one of the people who was alarmed by Yirmiyahu's prophecies and also his treatment. And Gemaryahu's brother was Achikam. Achikam, of course, means my brother has arisen. And Gedaliah ben Achikam ben Shaphan at one point saved Yirmiyahu for the people who were trying to kill Yirmiyahu. Okay, so that's important. And he gave Yirmiyahu refuge. Yirmiyahu's policy was as follows. God had already determined that the people of Yehudah were to be punished, and the temple was to be destroyed. The verdict was already in. The only question is, were the people going to accept this verdict and accept the punishment, or were they going to resist? Accepting the punishment would mean that the temple would be out of commission, the Jewish commonwealth would come to an end, Jews would be taken into exile. Basically, a prophecy of destruction, but interpreted or fulfilled in a lenient way. Or it could be that the people would resist, and the temple would be completely razed to the ground. Many, many people would be massacred. Okay, basically a Holocaust, and of course, the end of the Commonwealth, a longer Babylonian exile, whatever it might be. Okay, there's ways for the prophecy to come out in the best possible way, even though it's destruction. There's the worst possible way. And Yirmiyahu, on God's word, told the people that therefore they should accept the Babylonian conquerors, basically to stick their necks in the collar, so to speak. Take it, accept them as your masters, because they're going to be God's rod, so to speak, the rod of punishment. And Yirmiyahu was basically called a Nofel. A Nofel is a defector or a traitor. And he was accused of others because he was basically saying, there were false prophets, by the way, saying, shalom, shalom. Everything's going to be great. Don't worry about it. Even resist. And that wasn't smart. There was a large Jewish militant movement, similar to the times of the Second Temple, that wanted to fight at all costs, maintain independence and Jewish sovereignty. And Yirmiyahu was against that. So you can understand why Yirmiyahu himself is unpopular. After the destruction, the Babylonians had thoroughly won. The temple was gone. Many of the people had been taken into exile. Many more had died. The people basically understood that Yirmiyahu was right. However, there were some people, the minority, Shaphan's family basically, who had listened to Yirmiyahu beforehand, and they had already defected. They had already accepted the Babylonian yoke. Gedaliah ben Achikam ben Shaphan, okay, the son of the fellow who had saved Yirmiyahu at one point, Gedaliah was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar to be, like you said, the governor, the local governor. Why? Because the land had not been destroyed. The Babylonians saw that they had nice fertile land here. If you leave a skeleton community of Jews to guard every city, remember, a city is a walled place. It's a community, just like a neighborhood. Leave 2 or 3 men and their families to guard every city and to gather in the crops from the surrounding fields. That could be a strategic asset for the Babylonians who are preparing to conquer Egypt and spread even further west. Who knows? Maybe they've even gone into the islands in Greece, but it would be left to the Persians to engage the Greeks and not the Babylonians. Fine. So Nebuchadnezzar had appointed Gedaliah. Gedaliah basically mollified the more militant nationalist factions that were still around. There had been the Sarei HaChayalim. It's mentioned in Yirmiyahu over here. This is like the 40th chapter. I'll read it to you directly, and I will actually I'll share it on the screen for the good of those who are following us at home. Okay, let's understand what Gedaliah meant, by the way, when he said this. It says that Gedaliah was basically put in charge, and Yirmiyahu told them that now you have a chance to rebuild the land. This is God's reprieve. If you just accept Babylonian mastery and you play along, this could be the beginning already of the redemption. It says here, Vaikach Rav Tabachim, and the Sar, of course, it says here, Nevu Zaradan gave Yirmiyahu special treatment because the Babylonians appreciated Yirmiyahu's prophecies. They respected him. And he said, Rei kol aretz lefanecha el tov ashar b'necha lechet sham alech. Yirmiyahu was given the chance to go wherever you want. Nice land. You can take whatever you want. V'odenu lo yashuv v'shuv el Gedaliah v'nachikam ben Shaphan asher ifkid melch bavel ba'arei Yehuda v'shevito b'tocham o el kol ashar b'necha lelechet lech v'aitin lo rav tabachim arucham u'maseit v'yishalchehu. So Yirmiyahu was given, or you could just go hang out with Gedaliah in the Mitzpah, where that was basically his capital. I guess, or his seat. That's where he was staying. And it says here that the Sarei Chayalim heard this. Who are the Sarei Chayalim? Asher Basadeh. Those are the militant groups that had decided, or are still holding out hope for what? A popular military resistance or rebellion. Okay, fight to the very end against Nebuchadnezzar. So there's some survivors. They're called the Sarei Chayalim. Sarei Chayalim is basically a ragtag army, militias. And the Sarim are basically the guys in charge. You can imagine a guy like Yochanan ben Kireach, one of the stars of this story, who I don't know how many men exactly he had behind him, but these men have families. You can imagine David HaMelech back in his day before he was king, commanded 400 men with families. Vayishmu kol Sarei Chayalim asher basadeh heim of anshehem ki yivkid melch Gedaliyahu v'nachikam ba'aretz. The Sarei Chayalim are all there hanging out there. They're in the wilds, camping out. They heard that Gedaliah had been appointed by the king of Babylon. He's in charge now. Not only that, Gedaliah was basically allowed a community. There's women and children there, and some poor people of the land. Not anybody who's aristocratic or is used to being in charge who can potentially lead a rebellion. Farmers. Gedaliah basically has a small community, and they realize, there's hope. They're living. You don't leave the women and children in there, and these are all people who are not taken into exile. Vayavo Gedaliah hamitzpata. So they came to Gedaliah in the mitzpah, and who was among them? Yishmael ben Netanyahu v'Yochanan Yonatan ben Karech Usvarah ben Tanchumet uvnei Ephai and Tofafi v'Yaznahu ben Machati Hema v'Anshehem. All these different, I guess, warlord types. Two of the names here, Yishmael ben Netanyahu, he's the bad guy. Okay, so they came to him. So listen to what Gedaliah says. Why Shavalahem Gedaliyahu v'Nachikam ben Shaphan u'Shahem lemor. He swore to them. Here's his oath. Al tireu me'avoda kastim. From his oath, you could see what they're afraid of. They came to Gedaliah and said, "You're basically, you're cooperating with the enemy. You're collaborating. You're collaborating with the enemy." And he convinced them. He's told them, "No, it's not so bad to work for the Chaldeans. Shavu va'aretz v'ivdu et melech Bavel. Dwell in the land. Serve the king of Babylon. We tav lachem. It will be good for you. Va'ani hinani yoshev ba'mitzpah la'amod lifnei hakastim. I sit here in the mitzpah. I'm supposed to stand before the Chaldeans. That is, I'm the official face of the community right now. Okay. Asher yavo elenu. They're going to come to us. Vatem isfu yain v'kayetz v'shemen. Gather up the wine and the dates. That's the kayetz and the oil. Basically, gathering the crops because now what time of year is it? It's after Av and it's before Tishrei. Basically, Elul time, beginning of the harvest. V'simu bichlechem. Put in vessels. Ushvu ba'rechem asher tfastem. Take whatever cities you want, and the land's mostly empty. Grab onto whatever you can. The gam kol yidim asher b'moav uvnei Amon uve'Edom v'asher b'chol arsot shamu ki natan melech Bavel she'erit liuda. The Jews, survivors who had ran away, refugees, they went to Bnei Ammon and Moab, places to the east, and Edom southeast, and other lands, heard that the king of Babylon had given reprieve to Judah. That is, it's already over. War's over. We can probably rebuild now. And that Gedaliyahu had been put in charge. So they started gathering in the crops. Glimmer of hope. Now, basically, what Gedaliyahu did was unite two factions. What two factions were those? The minority faction that listened to the prophets all along, represented by Gedaliyahu, which is what? Give in to the Babylonians, accept their mastery. God has ordained this. That's the verdict. and those who had originally been the greatest resistors, the Sorei HaChayolim. They're the ones who said no. And Gedaliah convinced them, no, we could do this. So they were playing along. I like to think that, just as an aside, you study the history of the Holocaust, the darkest chapter in history, which is also quite short chapter, especially in the lands beyond Germany. The Holocaust basically starts with World War II, 1939, and it's over by 1945. You don't even have a decade there to study. One of the things the Germans, Yamach Shemam, imposed on the Jewish people, especially in Poland and other conquered areas to the east, is the Judenrat, which means the Jewish Council. And they made the Jews self-govern, although the Germans basically they were ordering everything. And in a lot of places, there are well-documented stories, well-testified stories of how these Judenrats were often traitors to their own people. They were there for the money, to save their own skins. They were hated by their fellow Jews. Sometimes they were assassinated by their fellow Jews. Look what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Lodz Ghetto, the Sosnovich Ghetto. Maniak Marin was a name that occurs in a few books as being a terrible Jew. I know that there was a fellow, Leon Gleischer, has in his book about how he discovered one of these characters after the war. He was a survivor from Galicia. Him and his brother survived, but that's it. No one else from their families, their children, their sisters, their brothers, their the parents, everybody gone. And how he attacked this Jewish turncoat. And then there were places where the Judenrat was actually trying to help the Jews. Yes, they had been appointed by the Germans. Someone else, no one else is there. They were forced into this job, and they did the best they could, especially trying to help resistance movements and do whatever they can. And you could find stories about them also in certain ghettos. So it is a complicated piece of history. I would think that Gedaliah, especially because he had the backing of the Navi, he was following what God said, was the type who basically said, we have to go along with this only because God said so. But he was sympathetic to the Jewish cause. He was not a traitor to the Jewish people. So this was basically working. And the people who had resisted, by the way, these Sorei Chayalim, who were the ones who were up for the fight, had basically been calmed down, and now they're going to play along also, at least for now. But then it says, we had previously said that Yochanan ben Kareach and the rest of these Sorei Chayalim had come to Gedaliah in the mitzvah. Don't you know that Baalis, king of Ammon, has sent Yishmael ben Netanyah, another one of these Sorei Chayalim, to kill you? He's just an assassin. He's not one of us. He's not in it for Jewish sovereignty or anything like that. He's just a foreign agent. Who's Baalis Melech Ammon? Listen to this. V'lo amin lahem Gedaliah ben Achikam. Gedaliah ben Achikam didn't believe them. Yochanan ben Kareach even told Gedaliah secretly, when they were still in the mitzvah, I'll just take out this Yishmael ben Netanyah. No one will know anything. We'll just sweep it under the rug. You'll be safe. Why should he kill you? If you allow him to assassinate you, that will be the end of this. Then we'll be totally scattered, complete exile. He told him, no, I'll toss at Advarzeki Sheker Tadover. Can't be. You're lying. And then what happens? What's Zerah HaMelucha? Turns out Yishmael ben Netanyah had some royal lineage. Others say he used to practice Molech worship. He gave his own Zerah to the Melucha, to Molech. Okay, that's a medrash. So basically, you can understand that Yishmael ben Netanyah sort of is jealous. This is not about Jewish nationalism. This is his own personal gain. Okay? And it says, Vayakum Yishmael ben Netanyah v'aser nashim asher hayu ito. Him and his 10 men got up. Vayaku with Gedaliah ben Achikam ben Shaban v'cher vayamet oto. And they assassinated him. And by the way, it says on the Chodesh Hashvi, but it doesn't say what day of the month, which means it was on Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. You and I know as Rosh Hashanah. And then they killed all the people who were there with Gedaliah, all the women and children, and they just, whole massacre. And then word started getting out, and other Jews coming from north, pilgrims from Shilo, who are just coming, they haven't even heard that the temple has been destroyed, and they're coming to bring an offering, a tribute to their new governor, because that's what you used to do. You have to, bring mincha, which is a tribute to the governor. Was it good? Hakriveuna lefechatecha. right? That's what Malachi says. Would you give a thing like this to your pecha? Pecha was basically the word for governor in Old Persian, and he assassinated them also, and that basically led to this whole thing. Yishmael ben Netanyah, Yochanan ben Kareach, and the rest of his gang came and had to fight Yishmael ben Netanyah, and they put them down and killed them. They killed these traitors, these actual traitors, and then Yishmael ben Kareach was stuck with the survivors. That basically said, now the king of Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar, is going to have his reprisal. Gedaliah was his man in charge and was in charge of a project that was supposed to supply food and wealth to the king, and now that's not happening. So they decided against the wishes and against the advice, God's word through Yirmiyahu, to take everybody and run away to Egypt. And they took Yirmiyahu with them. They forced him to go. What's the takeaways from this? Why did Baalis Melech Ammon have Yishmael ben Netanyah assassinate Gedaliah ben Achikam? And the answer was because he wanted to move in. Where is Ammon? Basically, Ammon's right across the Jordan River. The Ammonites were basically looking at this and saying, well, our main city, our capital still survived. We are basically on the fringes of this Babylonian conquest. The Babylonians haven't touched us. We're still in our land. And they basically just cleared out this Eretz Yehudah place and large parts of what used to be the area of the 10 tribes. But he left a skeleton group there. The Babylonians are trying to hold on to this area, and they left Jews there to run the place. Wouldn't it be great if we could just take over this place for ourselves? It's mostly empty. Baalis Melech Ammon was thinking about his own selfish interests. And he found a selfish Jewish puppet to do it for him, do his dirty work. Why? Probably for most reasons why people do these things. Selfish reasons usually involve pride and money. That is what Yishmael ben Netanyah stood for. He was ostensibly a leader of his people, one of the Sarei Chayalim, but he wasn't like the rest of them. All the other Sarei Chayalim, led by Yochanan ben Kareach, had warned Gedaliah about him. This Yishmael ben Netanyah is not one of us. So why did I address this today? Because I was asked by 3 people to do so. Apparently someone put out something, I think it was Slifkin, put out something recently, basically saying that Gedaliah represented a moderate political faction, which was, what do you call it, I guess pragmatic, and was pursuing peace, akin to basically the mainstream Israeli politics, usually the mainstream parties that want to approach a decent 2-state solution and peace with our peaceful Ishmaelite neighbors. And and the Yishmael ben Netanyahs are represented by what would be our political right, who are trying to undermine the mainstream because we have a foolish hold or a foolish grasp, but not like just, I don't mean like as an understanding, but I mean we're holding on to it against all odds. We're trying to hold on to something that's failing, a foolish right-wing fantasy of complete Jewish sovereignty, whatever, I don't know, whatever people on the left or the center imagine a caricature of a right-winger wants. Okay? And that's what he's doing. And Yishmael ben Netanyah represents the right wing that would use violence to undermine the pragmatic, moderate, and level-headed center, which is utter nonsense if you actually are familiar with what the story we have in front of us is. Okay? This wasn't the right versus left or the peace camp and the moderate camp versus anything. This was the Jews who were following God, even though it was unpopular because it involved cooperating with the Babylonians, along with the Jews who had originally resisted God's word and had wanted to resist the Babylonians also, but eventually came to realize they had lost. So now it's time for everybody to play along. And it was undermined by who? A traitor to the entire Jewish people who was only out for his own personal gain and was a puppet of foreign interests seeking to take over what should be Jewish territory, which, by the way, might be more akin to the extreme left, the type of left that, follows whatever the European left says, undermining the Jewish people and bringing death to innocent men, women, and children in the land of Israel for their own personal gain. Okay, there you go. So we should know. And now we're going to answer the next question. That's the story of Gedaliah's assassination. This is not, unfortunately, the first time that Jew killed Jew. That happened many times beforehand. That actually started with what? In Moses' time, where Jews were told to kill other Jews, and Pinchas just killed one Jew and stopped the plague. But Moshe Rabbeinu had been told right before that, okay, find all the evildoers, the people who are bowing down to Baal Peor, no, Nitzmadim to Baal Peor, whatever that means, and kill them. But Pinchas was able to intervene and kill one of them, and that was good enough. And then there was Jew-on-Jew violence. Shortly afterwards, after Joshua died, there was a civil war among the Jews, and the tribe of Binyamin was nearly wiped out. That was started by basically the murder of a single woman by basically a mob in the town of Giv'ah. And unfortunately, the Times of Judges has other stories of Jew on Jew. By Jew, I mean Israelite, on Israelite violence. And that persisted, by the way, even the times of King David. There was civil war. And Abner was assassinated by Joab in the middle of this civil war. And there's many other examples. And Joab eventually assassinated his own cousin, Asael. No, sorry, not Asael. Sorry, Amasa. Okay, his own cousin. He assassinated in a later Jewish civil war. So Jew-on-Jew violence, unfortunately, is nothing new. And there's many other examples from the times of the kings because they split up into two kingdoms, which are sometimes at war with each other. So the death of Gedaliah and his few dozen or so followers does not warrant the creation of a new fast day, despite the tragedy. Why is it a fast day? Because it's like all the other fast days. All the other fast days mark milestones in the Babylonian conquest and destruction of our Jewish commonwealth. What are the days? That's Asar B'Teves, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Tisha B'Av, and Tzom Gedaliah. What do they all have in common? One is the start of the Babylonian siege. The next is when the siege intensified such that they breached the walls of the city. And then a few weeks later, they actually uttered destruction of the city. Okay. So, and wait a minute. So those happened in progression. The Shiva Asar B'Tammuz was how long before Tisha B'Av? 3 weeks before. Okay, it's always on the calendar. Shiva Asar B'Tammuz was always 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av. It didn't exactly happen on those days, by the way. You look at the books of the prophets, you see that what happened on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz actually happened over the course of a few weeks, from the 7th to like the 19th or whatever it is. And Chazal decided, this is Yerushalmi, God himself was confused about the dates because of the distress that he was having, so to speak. So the sages settled on the 17th. So too the events of the 9th of Av, that are commemorated on the 9th of Av, actually took place over the course of the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th of Av. And that's clear from the biblical narrative. And the sages decided that the main fast day should be observed when? On the 9th. The one in the middle, that's when the main tragedy happens. And they determined that that which happened a few weeks after Tisha B'Av, on the 1st of Tishrei, which, by the way, how soon after Tisha B'Av is that? That's exactly 7 weeks. 7 weeks and 2 days later. 7 weeks and 2 days later, the tragedy continued. Why? Because first the Babylonians besieged the city of Jerusalem, by the way, plunging hundreds of thousands, not millions of people into starvation. And then, of course, they started to destroy the city's walls, destroyed the temple, and then took the Jews into exile. Even though the temple had been destroyed and the majority had been taken into exile, the fact that there's still some left and the country had not been destroyed was a glimmer of hope. Maybe it's not going to be so bad. Nope. The assassination of Gedaliah completed this Babylonian destruction. So that is what we are mourning, or that's what we were mourning yesterday. And we haven't really recovered from that, by the way. That's why for many, it was still a fast day. Yes, it's optional. You heard the rabbis share about this. Okay. But the point is, this is something that's mentioned by the prophets themselves. It's mentioned in the Mishnah. It's classically a day that the Jews always knew about, that we are mourning what happened involving the destruction of the Jewish state as it was back then. And it is not necessarily about how Jews killed other Jews or about right-wing violence or other political considerations. Simply, the Babylonians beat us because of our own stupidity. We brought upon the destruction ourselves from not listening to God and his prophets. And this was just a continuation of that. Throughout the story, you see Yirmiyahu's frustration that whenever he tells them something, basically the majority, what? Do the opposite. That's what the stories are entirely about. It's a few chapters in Yirmiyahu. Everything he said. There's some that listen. Yeah, this one, Elvid Melech HaKushi was a good guy. Tzidkiyahu apparently was on Yirmiyahu's side. Did Tzidkiyahu have the power to listen to him? No, because Tzidkiyahu was a puppet of the Sarim himself. He was a young man put on the throne. What was he? He was a figurehead, basically. It says so. He had no power. He was powerless to do what he could. And then he was forced into a rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar, and he basically had his children killed. You heard about the terrible things Nebuchadnezzar did to Tzidkiyahu. Okay? There's many explicit in the Tanakh, more in the Midrashei Chazal. You don't want to end up in that situation. Okay, we should know better things, and it should never happen. But we should at least be familiar with what's going on here and try not to politicize our fasts or to politicize our reading of the Bible. We should just know what it says.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.